dynamic way. But as Jānis Kreisliņš today in the morning said, cultural heritage is unrestrictedly bound to conversation. And now we will try to speak, but this panels which will follow presentations of people involved in policy making, those panels won't be panels of experts, but panels of policymakers. Therefore, conversation will be amongst me and them, but later afterwards you will be able to get involved, and also we will have mentee for every session. Basically, why it is important to speak with policymakers together with experts and with the institutions, because usually discussions take place whether between the experts and the institutions or between the institutions and policymakers. These three parties rarely meet, and this is an occasion to do that, and that's what my colleagues have intended whilst organizing this conference. My name is Gustavs Strenga. I am senior researcher of the National Library of Latvia and Tallinn University. I will be in charge of this discussion and also moderating the presentations. What will follow now? We will have 6 presentations of policymakers. After that, each of them will draw their number, and we'll have 2 panels to make it more dynamic and more interesting. The questions of the 2 panels are going to be similar but not the same, and approximately each panel will last for half an hour, and you'll be able to ask the questions at the end of each panel. And also mentee at some point will appear again. So now, every presenter has 3 or 5 minutes to present on the present policies of maintaining cultural heritage in the digital age in their respective countries. And as a first speaker, I would like to invite Ülle Talihärm from Estonia. Mrs. Talihärm is advisor of libraries in the Ministry of Culture of Estonia.
No, it's Lithuania. Good afternoon, and I want to give a short overview of cultural heritage policy in Estonia. In Estonia there lives 1.3 million people, and over 65% of them are living in cities, so they have quite good possibilities to visit cultural institutions and cultural heritage institutions. As you see, we have quite many cultural heritage institutions our people and tourists can visit. And we have very good statistics on how many visits are to those cultural heritage institutions. But if we want to get statistics on digital services and their usage, it's not so easy. We have also the challenges like you all. There is a new digital generation. We must provide better access to culture, and also institutions have their challenges because they must lower costs. There is analog cultural heritage they must preserve, but also there are other processes on digital cultural heritage also they must deal. So they must have very effective services to provide services to users. Also customers want the services what are oriented to them, to the better customer experience. From the point of view strategy, we have general principles of cultural policy up to 2020, and the Ministry of Culture has pronounced the year 2020 as the year of digital cultural heritage, so we can promote digital culture better. Now, legislation and priorities of digital preservation. We have set our digital priorities in several acts, publications in all carriers, in Legal Deposit Copy Act. Also, we collect output-ready files of printed publications and films. It is obligation of Estonian National Library and also archives. We also collect all archival records in digital format, programs and other recordings. It is responsibility of Estonian Public Broadcasting, and museum objects in museum with Museum Act. Also, we have policy which are stated in acts and legislation, but also we have action plan for digitization to prove our services, cultural heritage institution services. This action plan is till 2023, and there are our digitization priorities: printed materials, art, photos, films, artifacts, and documents. For the next decade, we have carried out some preservation analysis to prepare our new cultural policy plan till 2030. We hope it will formulate objectives of cross-sectoral cultural policy and also the national digital agenda. And after that, we start to prepare new digitization action plan. Till today, the cooperation on the Baltic Sea region between institutions and politicians is very fruitful. Cultural and youth projects and expert-level conferences, seminars, study trips. But in the future, we must reduce manual work carried out in cultural sector. That's why we must digitalization of our cultural sector processes, services. We must main concern is long-term preservation of digital content. Also artificial intelligence technologies in our cultural sector, audience development and services development are the aspects that should be developed.
Thank you very much. You should draw a number. Number 2. Okay. As next speaker, I would like to invite Mrs. Minna Karvonen from Finland. Mrs. Karvonen is Director of the Department for Art and Cultural Policy, Ministry of Education and Culture.
Does this work? Hello, it's good to see you there. I'm Minna from the Ministry of Education and Culture. This has been a wonderful day. I feel a little bit stupid, but I can cope with that after all the lovely presentation and wise people I've listened to. Okay, so this is a provocative small presentation. It's not a full broad picture of what happens in Finland. But I would like to say, first of all, that the small countries should really think big. And I think that maybe the framework of memory institutions only and cultural policy only isn't enough for us when we talk about memory institutions and cultural heritage in the digital era. So that's why in Finland we have just drawn up an information policy for the whole government, And I think that's a good framework for cultural heritage as such. Then we really believe in the responsibilities of the memory institutions and the deep understanding of what to prioritize, what to digitize, what to keep for future. The goal is, of course, wide accessibility of digital cultural heritage. The means are promoting cooperation between memory institutions, the thing that has been mentioned quite many times today, understanding user needs and really listening to people, and supporting common infrastructures and utilization of advanced technologies. Only a few words about our information policy. I'm proud of it. I've been the vice chair of it. Maybe that's one of the reasons, hopefully not. But I'm proud of it because it's not a data policy, and it's not an artificial intelligence policy. It's a holistic policy about information. So in that document, we talk about know-how, we talk about economy, we talk about digital security, we do talk about artificial intelligence, we really talk about the good management, effective use of our information in society. And we talk about interoperability. That it's a government report that was accepted just before Christmas last year and really discussed in the parliament just a few months ago. And it was interesting that since we had the elections only some weeks ago, so this was one of the themes. And when we were kind of, in the middle of this process, I would have never believed that would happen, but it did. The politicians really wanted to talk about this. I hope that my slides and other slides will be, there for you in the future, so that's why they are so rich, but I'm not going to read through them. I know that I have like 2 minutes left. But what I want to show you is that what kind of policy guidelines we have in our information policy. We talk about active citizenship and how we will support it by making public data functions and services accessible for everybody. We do talk about the availability of information, and we want to ensure it by investing in data access control, quality, and interoperability. We talk about the role of libraries in the society, how they are needed for informal learning, how they are needed in this environment for everybody. And we really want to empower people and kind of keep everybody here, have everybody involved, and we want to really have some targeted measures to vulnerable groups in the society. So this is not for just the elite, this is for everybody. So I think this is a nice framework for us. Accessibility is something that Christina has really told you about today, so I'm not going to say anything more about Finland. The only thing that I wanted to say is that it took about 10 years of my own life, and since I'm here only once, so I can say that it was well spent. The third thing is cooperation and coordination. We are true believers in interoperability. We really like the idea of information architecture and like to update it. And it's a shared thing for all memory institutions. We are believers in standards, but also are believers in specifications. We want to have common services such as Finland long-term preservation system for all memory institutions in Finland. We want to maintain a continuous dialogue. Some structures and mechanisms were mentioned by Christina, but the thing that I want to say is, for example, a voluntary network of TACO, which is a network of professionally run museums in Finland and has to do with acquisition, documentation, and collection collaboration. And this is a nice framework for discussing also kind of digital policies in the museum field together. So it's a combination of actually collection management, collections, and digitizations. And again, the user needs and expectations. We don't do this for us, and we don't do this for collection's sake. We do this for people and for the future generations. What state does specifically is that we try to promote innovative use of cultural heritage, and we give, for example, state subsidies for 3D digitization, and even in there we would like those projects to create a network, so they will kind of pool expertise on, also in this theme. What about cooperation in the Baltic Sea region? I think that there are about 30 or 40 people that are wiser than me in this subject. But I would really like to see more pooling of expertise. I would really like to see more mobility of especially young people. I would really like to see digital and physical roots here. So this was my short presentations, and I know that what was asked from me was that how do you actually, for example, prioritize what is there to be preserved, and I think that this is our answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Which number? Number 2. So we have a group which is building up. As next speaker, I would like to invite Rúnar Leifsson from Iceland. And Mr. Leifsson is Senior Advisor in Ministry of Education, Science and Culture of Iceland.
Thank you for inviting me to this very interesting conference. I learned a lot today. Firstly, I want to differentiate between the so-called born digital material from material which needs to be digitized from printed, pictorial, or analog forms. As in other countries here, the born digital material has now for years been actively and comprehensively collected by law, by institutions such as the National Archives, the National Library, and so forth. This means all material produced by institutions, by public departments, all published material, all websites under the Icelandic domain, and so on. In this short presentation, I will be addressing the material which needs to be actively digitized from other forms. Oh, I made it work. Okay. So, the digitization of cultural heritage has been part of the overall national cultural policy since 2013. Cultural institutions are expected to make targeted use of information technology in their work, and in particular for the dissemination of cultural heritage. The main objectives of the policy as regards digital heritage are, among others, to make the nation's cultural heritage accessible in digital form wherever possible, to safeguard the quality and visibility of the Icelandic culture in digital form, to ensure the professionalism of online presentations by cultural institutions, both in Icelandic and in foreign languages, to ensure the professionalism of online, to search for solutions to copyright and intellectual property issues on the internet, and cooperating in this respect with artists' associations and public authorities in neighboring countries. And lastly, to ensure that cultural institutions step up in their efforts to make artistic material and the cultural heritage available in digital form, and that they strive for close cooperation with the relevant stakeholders. Now, specific actions based on the national cultural policy include a parliamentary resolution passed in 2014 on the digital preservation of Icelandic cultural heritage. The resolution charged the Minister of Education, Science and Culture with the task of forming a precise, holistic and ambitious policy, ensuring that literary works, musical works, fine art, and other cultural heritage from past centuries, from past decades, and indeed past years, would always be available for the public in digital form. The goals of the resolutions are twofold, and we've heard this often today, is to promote the protection of cultural heritage in face of various elements of destruction, and also to ease the general public access to cultural heritage. And the plan is that this digitization should be finished ideally in 2030. Now, this again led to a formation of a group in 2017, 2 years ago, under the leadership of the Ministry of Education, Science and Culture, and comprised members of the GLAM sector that mapped the current recommendations, that mapped the current state of digitization in the country, and then they made recommendations about the smartest ways forward. They gave estimates on time factors, costs, and labor, and this is really the roadmap that we're working after now. Then last year, another parliamentary resolution was passed based on the 2017 report regarding the specific digitization of printed heritage. And this means all books printed in Iceland from the beginning until 2015, all newspapers, magazines, everything printed. And of course, this process has started quite a few years ago. I mean, we are far ahead with magazines and newspapers. We already have all books before 1850 almost digitized and so on. But what has been digitized already and what will be digitized is meant to be made available online free of charge for all. Things that are under copyright will have to be opened with Icelandic IP addresses, as of yet, at least. Okay, priorities. Again, the priorities in digitization defined by the working group in 2017 fall into two somewhat overlapping categories. It's preservation and ease of access. The cultural heritage prioritized for preservation is defined by professionals in the GLAM sector, and this is characterized really by heritage in risk. For example, rare books, rare documents that are in high demand for use by academics, for example, sound and video on fragile and perishable mediums, often technically obsolete and that suffer from declining quality. This is, of course, old films, old tapes, and so on. The same goes for photographs, especially old ones printed on inferior paper, and then more obviously old and fragile documents, old books, parchments, manuscripts, and so on. So the priorities in access are in general on assembling standardized metadata on all forms of cultural heritage, where this is documents, archaeological heritage, art, photographs, etc. We must be able to find the heritage we're looking for, and we have to make sure it's available online. But more specifically, the priorities of true digitization, if you like, is on the printed material that I mentioned earlier, and this is inspired by various programs in the neighboring countries. For example, by a Norwegian project called Bokhilla.no, which is all books in Norway available on one website. Now, international cooperation can be beneficial, of course, in many regards. This stretches from kindred institutions in different countries that work with similar or even the same material and thus share digitization agendas. An example, which is close to Iceland, of course, is that we have institutions in Iceland that work with old manuscripts, institutions in Denmark that work with similar or even the same manuscripts, and they've successfully cooperated. There are great benefits in standardization, for example, in metadata between countries, because this is essential in all possible future sharing or combining of material. I think we can learn a lot from each other, share best practices, as we have done today. We can gain experience from others. I know that Icelandic institutes have gained a lot from their sister institutes in neighboring countries. I mean, we really haven't invented the wheel or anything. It's all experience that we have tried to get from our neighbors. And then there are issues of copyright and intellectual property that, of course, have to be solved internationally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you have to choose your card. Yeah, it is exciting, definitely. Number 2, we have got a group of number 2. So as the next speaker, I would like to invite Mr. Uldis Zariņš from Latvia. And Uldis Zariņš is Deputy State Secretary for Cultural Policy, Ministry of Culture of Latvia. Please, microphone is yours. Or, okay, you.
All right, hello, good to see you. No, the presentation apparently didn't reach somewhere upstairs, so I'll do without. All right. We are not exactly extremely unique, so the picture and the policy developments in Latvia have been, I think, quite similar as other states. So, why is that? No, it's not there, so don't look for it. It's been pretty much for the last 20 years a bottom-up approach. So institutions, the National Library first and foremost started the digitization, as Minister mentioned this morning, in 1999 already, starting with newspapers. And I have to admit that the ministry and the policy-making level caught up a bit later. So digitization was already in some form present in the cultural policy guidelines for 2014-2020 called Creative Latvia, which among other policy goals included also goals regarding the digital presence of cultural materials and cultural institutions online, as well as there's a separate policy document called Information Society Development Guidelines developed by another ministry, which are dealing with all things digital, all e-government, e-health, all e-things. So e-culture is briefly mentioned also among other priorities in this document. So stemming from the cultural policy guidelines, there is a separate strategy for digitization of cultural heritage, defining the main priorities, which are, again, quite similar probably as other countries. So it's preservation, it's how do we preserve effectively both material which is digitized and material which is born digital, how do we make it effectively accessible online as widely as possible, and also quite importantly, how do we build competence, and how do we develop guidelines and standards which are adopted by the cultural sector. And the main tool for implementation of the policy is European structural funds, because unfortunately we don't have a separate budget line especially for digitization. So most of the institutions are approaching the digitization using their existing budget and figuring out their own priorities. But we were lucky enough to support for a second planning period already the support of European structural funds. So currently we are in the middle of a first stage of a 8 million euro project, which is split 50-50 for 50% budget for digitization of cultural heritage materials. And this includes all types of materials coming from National Library and other libraries, from museums, from archive, from audiovisual archives, from TV and radio archives, from the Heritage Board, and even documenting some of the ongoing cultural activities like current heritage. So, for example, filming some TV, some theater plays or concerts which are taking place now and aren't documented in any other way. And also the rest of the 50% is spent on building up and strengthening the infrastructure, so both physical infrastructure, but mainly IT systems, because during the previous period, there were another bunch of EU-funded projects which were mostly sector-specific, so for library, for museum, for archive sector, and now we have to connect all those systems in a really meaningful way so they collaborate to build a joint digital repository, a joint digital access point to the collections of all the institutions. So this is where we are now. Another, again, important aspect of this project is collaboration among sectors, among institutions, developing of guidelines, developing of something we are calling Competence Network, because we are aware that a single institution cannot hold all the competencies. For example, National Library probably won't be the best expert in 3D digitization, but this is why we have Heritage Board who are really keen on this aspect of work. So we really see it as an opportunity to build a cohesive national network of digitization competence and responsibilities. So as for priorities, they stem from institutions themselves. So they mainly define the priorities, which are the collections which should be prioritized in terms of digitization. So as a rule of thumb, it's a cultural value of objects if it's requested frequently by public, if it's in a fragile state, so a mix of those elements. And based on this priority list, we came up with the priorities for digitization for materials which were included in the structural funds project. So, yeah, as for collaboration, well, this is why the National Library organizes this conference, which takes part of the bigger projects funded by CBSS. So we see it as a big opportunity to tackle some really important issues we cannot solve alone. One of these is digital preservation. So it's a extremely expensive project which probably could be made more effective by collaborating. Then it's also sharing the collections to build joint digital collections, because we share the same area, we share history and culture. So we are really looking forward of the outcomes of these projects in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So we know, Uldis, that you're in group 1, but still I will give you a card. As next speaker, I would like to invite Mrs. Gintautė Žemaitytė from Lithuania. Mrs. Žemaitytė is Vice Minister of Culture of Lithuania.
Good afternoon, nice to see you here. You are the most resistant to the beautiful city of Riga and flourishing spring outside. So I will give you some information about cultural heritage digitalization policy in Lithuania, just how our system looks like and what we are aiming at. We have 1,500 cultural institutions operating in the field of cultural heritage in Lithuania. So we have 9 national archives, more than 1,000 libraries, more than 100 museums, 52 theaters, Lithuanian Film Center, the Department of Cultural Heritage under the Ministry of Culture, and also the National Public Broadcasting Company, the National Radio and Television. These institutions are responsible for the preservation of the Lithuanian cultural heritage and for the use of digital technologies to contribute to the preservation process. Nowadays, mainly movable cultural properties and audiovisual cultural assets are being digitized on the national level. We are still very in the beginning phase of immovable cultural heritage, and it mainly lies on private projects. Digital technologies are changing not only the working methods of the cultural institutions, but also they are improving the values and culture of workplaces. The promotion of openness of memory institutions foster cooperation and enhance users' engagement in their participation. Lithuania benefits a lot of this new approach to the digital technologies. The major initiatives of digitization of cultural heritage have been implemented on the basis of cross-sectoral cooperation. So we have a nice system, and the common access to platform to digital cultural heritage, as well as the network of centers of excellence in digitization of cultural heritage has been developed. You can see the pyramid. This particular network of centers of excellence coordinates and builds capacity of the specialists working in the digitization field. It is very active and promising now, because in last year they were launched 8 new projects under the EU funding within 27 million euros. And there are different projects all related to cultural heritage. The result of these projects are oriented to the interoperability of different digital systems, which is very important, and also to integration of new institutions and cultural content into this digitization process of cultural heritage. Also, the accessibility and visibility of the cultural heritage to the public. The Lithuanian national policy, strategies and programs pay important attention to the cultural heritage and its digitization. The culture strategy 2030 is almost finished, and the new digital agenda is in process. Both documents stress the potential of memory institutions and cultural heritage content, underline the need to develop abundant virtual cultural heritage space in a user-friendly manner, best suited to the needs of public, to increase the engagement of various audiences, as well as to foster the use of digitalized data in different sectors as tourism, education, research, creativity, industry, and others. This cross-sectoral cooperation is crucial for us at the moment, actually, because we still are keeping more or less in closed sectoral fields, so also in this conference would be nice to see more museums, archives, and other memory institutions to have this better intersectoral cooperation. The strategic documents also underline the need to use emerging technologies such as three-dimensional scanning, extended reality, and the big data to increase the visibility of Lithuania's cultural heritage on the international platforms. Also, Lithuania is one of few countries which launched its artificial intelligence strategy, and our Ministry of Economy and Innovation has a very big plan for cloud system for all kinds of institutions and cultural institutions, and heritage also has its dedicated place in this cloudy Lithuania. So we are on the moment of change, and we hope to have this cooperational policy stronger to have a holistic system. So thank you, and that's it.
Thank you very much. This is your card, number 1. And as last presenter, we have Mrs. Eva Stengård from Sweden. Mrs. Stengård is Deputy Director in Ministry of Culture, and you can take the microphone.
Is it on? Yeah. So a few words about Sweden. I don't think I'll sit, I'll stand. On the current situation in Sweden, I didn't make any slides, so I don't have numbers on the number of institutions, but there are a lot of them. Anyway, in Sweden we don't have a national agenda at the moment, digital agenda. When it comes to digital cultural heritage, we really have to go back to 2011, when we had a national agenda for this. It was partly because of the Council resolutions on European and the European Library. And it also, as a ramp-up for that, there was the national institution was asked to provide information on their collections and the degree on digitization and so. And it was very clear that it was very different situations at the different institutions. Anyway, in the national digitization agenda for cultural heritage, there was 2 parts. The national institutions was asked to provide a strategic plan for their own work. And there was also the formation of the Secretariat for Cooperation on digitization, the digital preservation and digital access. Some of you may know this as Digisam. And that was, of course, a political way of trying to promote the collaboration among the different sectors. They have now been active for some time, and it's a bit slow work, but it's going on. There's also the cultural heritage is also part of other governmental bills. For instance, the last governmental bill on research set aside some funds for digitization of cultural heritage material, some 40 million Swedish kroners, which I think is one of the first times that has happened, to private funders also put aside the same amount of money. So for 2 years, there's been some money for this. Of course, there's some problems with this. Many of the heritage institutions isn't set up to digitize on demand. Some are, but not all. And also, in 2017, there was another governmental bill on cultural heritage in general. And there, the Digisam was made permanent. It was set up as a project to begin with, but now it's permanent. And also the building on the successful collaboration between the Royal Library and the National Archives, the Center for Mass Digitization was set aside as a competence center for paper-based materials for digitization. So I'll see if there was something else I'll say. Of course, there's other types of work being done in the area of digital, but it's done in different ministries, and we'll try to get in the cultural heritage aspects as often as we can. So, for instance, in the current national digital strategy that's looking for a sustainable digital Sweden, the libraries are acknowledged as very important for media literacy. But so, okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is your card.
Yeah, I guess it's a one.
It's one, and you can take place together with Mr. Zariņš and Mrs. Žemaitytė. You're welcome to take place on our first panel. You were the last to speak, but now you'll be first ones. And I would like to ask my colleagues to make Menti question appear, and this is a time when you should be active. You should take out your devices. If you were sleeping, you should wake up. Hopefully not, you were not. And it's very, I should say, entertaining question. Very hypothetical, because you won't have 10 million euros. But what would you do if you had 10 million euros for a project on cultural heritage in the digital age? And Menti number is 528985. During discussion, most of the time, your answers will be on the screen, so we'll be active. We'll try also to discuss and then return to Menti question, and also if someone will have questions from the audience or comments, you will be able to ask the questions and comments. So thank you for being here. And my first question is quite tricky. It's about cultural heritage. In the last few decades, this term, let's say, it is overwhelmingly broad. It's used almost for everything. It's used both for the values and testimonies created in the past, which we have received. It's also used for the values and testimonies that we are creating today, and already considering them to be heritage today. And also, it's also used for different phenomena which will be created in future, and we know that maybe there will be cultural heritage. So my question to you as policy makers is, what actually is cultural heritage in the limited vocabulary of the policy papers. Because it has to be quite simple that everyone who's involved understands that. So,
thank you. It's an honor. Well, probably a definition of cultural heritage is a topic we could spend an entire conference on, at least
just
3 days.
3 minutes.
But in 3 minutes, I don't think we have a very precise definition in policy papers either, and I don't think it's actually right for a policymaker to define what cultural heritage is. It's really more up to the researcher and professional. So I think from point of view of policy, probably something of a definition could be that the heritage is something that is worth preserving and then passing on. So I think that I know it's an extremely vague answer, and I'm essentially saying nothing, but I intentionally keep the definition as open as possible because we are never quite certain what it could be. So I think it's actually a good thing. So it involves also some critical thinking about what actually the values are and what are those things that we want to build upon.
Okay, Mrs. Stengård.
Yes, I have to say in Sweden we have taken the same sort of idea on cultural heritage from the policy side of it. As I mentioned, we had a government bill just a few years on cultural heritage, and we talked about should we define cultural heritage in this context, but we decided that we need to have an open mind to this, have an open understanding on cultural heritage. It cannot not only include the good and the honorable, but also the difficult parts of our history. And we decided to say that, well, it can be understood as all traces and expressions of the past that we are attributing value to today and use today. So, and I don't think it's necessary for us to have the same understanding of cultural heritage. So
it can be very diverse for everyone who's involved.
Yeah, it's up to the users, the civil society, the policymakers to find the understanding in the present context, really.
Okay. Mrs. Žemaitytė.
Yeah, thank you. So if we look at our documents, actually we would have 4 kinds of cultural heritage as movable and movable, intangible and audiovisual. So mainly in those documents they are described in a kind of conceptual way, and in every exact or every particular situation we need experts to just explain, is it heritage or no. And it causes a lot of problems because it's easily politicized, and we have a lot of battles around Soviet sculptures. Are they heritage or not? What kind of heritage? Where to put them? And it's always easy to make a very hot political question with a very bad battle between just finding parties and no content, no real heritage content, no real vision of what heritage is in this battle. So what we are trying to do, we try to involve also, at the moment we are remaking our system of cultural heritage, the department and all monitoring of heritage preservation. So we try to involve as much as possible different audiences, the different institutions, also public, to discuss what we want to preserve, because we have this expert opinion, which is very important and usually the most important one, but also we have to pay attention to public opinion because it's public money, what we put as state. So it's a kind of complicated issue, this question of how broad, and in our specific laws, it described more, precisely, so quite kind of no problem. But when we have new things appearing with transsectoral cooperations, we have this diluted idea of heritage sometimes.
So you think, as I did grasp from your answers, that basically it is good that this term is not specifically defined, that it's broad and understood by all the parties involved differently, because it kind of provides a democratic approach in a way that no one can say, well, this is heritage and this is not, and in the political level. Any comments on that? Yeah, okay, that's fine, thank you. But I want to get back to the politics. Year 2016 was pretty stormy, not like Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump, but stormy in a way Brexit, and the right wing coming in European politics. And my first question regarding the politics is, do you see any risks that current political situation, when populists and right-wingers are taking over politics, or even some countries and some democracies, are there risks to the digital cultural heritage or cultural heritage at all? Or let's say everything's fine and we can live on without any doubts regarding these developments?
Could you specify what kind of specific risk populistic parties?
Don't you think that, for example, with look on Poland and Hungary, that censorship can also? I'm not asking for political opinions because you are in the executive power, but my question is, do you see that there are risks, or you think that in a way we are safe, political situation can change, but the cultural heritage is like a sphere, untouched, and has there are no implications on the field?
Thank you. I think if we talk about this kind of threat as censorship, anything can be at risk, democracy as well. So if it's very risky to have a very narrow point of view on the political level, as something is good or bad and censored. And we know this big discussion at UNESCO about some programs involving possible censorship is also very important. So yes, we have bad tendencies in this, but what I would think would be important, we should keep the expertise voice very loud and recognized as the most important argument to decide pro or contra. Because it's not only censorship. On the other hand, we could have, this idea of everything available to everyone, and that means we can't preserve anything because we don't have money, and we don't need preserve everything. So a kind of harmony is needed, and this is a very complicated question when it's related to money. So I would say the main risk of this political shifts is that money would be allocated to somewhere not necessarily the most important part, but to this, politically preferred part.
Thank you.
Well, the political risk that I immediately see is that the politicians may underestimate the power of cultural heritage in this sense. And looking into the digital cultural heritage, I have a growing concern about how do we guarantee the authenticity of the digital material used as we look to the memory institutions for the source, the original authentic material. But it's very easy to manipulate things in the digital world. And I think that's a question we need to look into more than we have perhaps so far.
Well, I think politicians and experts, they always see the world quite differently. So experts know what is really valuable and what's precious. Politicians always have a different worldview. And it's not even about right-wing and populist leanings. So I wouldn't say that the previous 10 years or more of neoliberal politics have been very good for culture either, because, well, we heard a number of times that we have to reply, so why should we spend money on culture? So what is the return of investment? So to turn everything in really financial Excel sheets, which is also quite damaging sometimes. So it's just a different worldview. But of course, yeah, it's there always are risks, certainly, and culture is one of the areas which can get really politically loaded when at some point somebody wants to decide which is the right culture and which is the wrong or inappropriate culture. So there is always a risk. And if we go really specifically, for example, of preservation and digitization activities, I think that actually a collaboration, an international collaboration would kind of help as a safeguard for that. So if you know that everything which we have digitized for KGB archives, for example, so which were recently opened on internet in Latvia. So if we know that it's safely served somewhere also in Estonia or Lithuania and in some other countries, so we are more or less certain that some Latvian politician wouldn't just, want to throw it all away. We know that there are copies elsewhere. That's something that, for example, happened when the Trump administration took the power. So they closed some of the government databases about environmental protection, so the civil society scrambled to preserve this data. So I think it's good to kind of be one step forward and have this digital preservation network internationally.
Yeah. We'll stay with the money. Because money is important. We have those 10 million question when we see that people are saying what they would like to have. But that's nice. If you're spending your own money, you can do what you want. Usually, almost in 95% of occasions, we're spending public money on digital cultural heritage, on different databases, on digitization projects. How would you justify that? How would you say to the wider public, how would you explain why it is necessary now to spend such a huge resources? And if a Minister of Finance comes who wants to cut your budget 50%, how you can explain to him, no, please don't?
Well, if the Ministry of Finance wants its money, then it will get its money. So
okay, a bad example, but defend your position.
It's always very tricky. So that's why I really love what Europeana is now doing with impact framework. So they are kind of defining the framework in which we can discuss the impact of culture and digitization of culture besides monetary terms. And I think in general, what we have to try to do is to really nail down the social impact. If it's an open civil society that we are after, and if we want to build a strong, proud, I know national politics are no more in vogue, but I think it's still important for people to develop not only global identities or really like tiny identities like sports fan of a certain club or something, but still all levels of identity building is really important. National identity, local identity. So and then these identities are built on culture. So my answer would be it's populism again. So we really quickly go down the route of populism. But my answer would be, if we want to have a Latvia where Latvians live and where the Latvian culture thrives, and it needs funding, and then that's the bottom line of it. And considering that a lot of our lives now is taking place in the digital sphere, so the culture has to be present in digital sphere as well.
Yeah, defending cultural heritage against the finance is always difficult, of course, but one of the answers is, of course, that it's the public's heritage as well. So, and they have the right to have access to it. And in Sweden, for instance, it's quite a long country. a lot of people haven't the possibility to access it in person. Digital is one way of doing that. We also know that in these times, research in humanities and arts is more and more important. Access to cultural and creativity is one of the bases for innovation. So there are different aspects that are quite important if you look into it. Mm.
Well, ministers of finance are usually very rational people, and they need very, very particular argumentation. So first of all, I would like to know myself, those just 10 million for digitalization, it's too abstract. But if we have some kind of, particular project, as for example, KB Lab, I think that this project could be a good example. What does it give to society? How it just disperse the light from the archives, from digital heritage, which is used by scholars, then by somebody else, then to general public. So I think this is the most important question at the beginning for ourselves, what we want to do and what we want to achieve, not just to spend 10 millions, but to reach some kind of goal. When we say we do not have enough resources of, financial or human resources for digitalization, but do we have this very clear idea what is the end we are doing? We need all the museum digitalized, or just part of it, or some collections, or we need a virtual museum which is not just digitalized collections. So I think for ourselves we still have too many questions to answer before to put all the money we need.
One last question before going really to Menti and to our audience is, as you can see there are some ideas, some proposals of spending 10 million who say that they want to create some Baltic databases or pan-Baltic, and the international cooperation that already has been mentioned. There are several ideas which are dwelling on that in the Menti conversation. But my question to you is, in which areas of heritage in digital era the cooperation among the Baltic Sea region countries would be the most rewarding and beneficial for all sides? So where do you see good opportunities to cooperate in our Baltic Sea area? Which are these questions which are, in fact, would benefit us all?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, I would say that is really a question for the professionals to identify the most beneficial areas of cooperation. But looking at a future open, linked assets, I probably ontologies and that conceptual models. But, because we need to also not only cooperate within our sectors, but cross over.
But you would encourage, as a policymaker, you would encourage such Baltic Sea area cooperation, which is taking place, but I mean, even more.
Of course. But we need the professionals to tell us what is the best way to do this.
I would go with three things. First of all, the first thing is, which I mentioned already, it's digital preservation, which is really expensive and will be becoming even more and more expensive. I know that a lot of people also in the heritage sector, they are looking at services like Amazon Cloud and saying, well, okay, let's store just the second or third copy on Amazon. It's dirty cheap, and then I don't think we should. It's probably cheap and easy, but I think we should rather invest in something like, I don't know, Baltic Nordic cultural cloud or something, which is really the state is the owner, and not only one state but a consortium. Another thing which is also sort of a holy grail is multilinguality. So we are getting there. So there are tools also developed in Latvia. Maybe not fluent, but going back to the idea of ontologies, so maybe on ontology level, which leads me to the third goal is really to give the objects more contextualization. So I think the metadata is still very flat and very not machine friendly. So it's not that easy as it would possible to hook up different objects, different things in different contexts. And then I think I see it as a great opportunity for connecting heritage and AI development, for example.
Okay, so a Nordic Baltic cloud is next option.
Yeah.
Mrs. Žemaitytė.
This cloud would be a nice opportunity. And also I think all of our countries have some specific expertise, so we could share it and maybe make some kind of expert mobility programs or some joint projects for making this idea of what we have to do together, because it would sound very nice to have, joint cloud, but we come to the problem of language, and it would cost millions and millions, and it would be maybe very rarely used sometimes. So this translation, it's a problem, and we can also find some ways, of coding it, but I think at the beginning what we could really do, for example, with Latvia and Estonia, we have Baltic Museology School, and it works very well. Every country by turn organizes specific courses for specialists, and it's very efficient. So we could start from something, not, we will come to the clown, but to start from something simply, which would lead to our common idea or some, vision of our pan-Baltic digitalization system or whatever, because we have a lot of things to share, to learn from each other, and it would be the most useful at this moment, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so it's very optimistic. We already cooperate, and also we look on our mentee, then there's lots of ideas which are saying, okay, paying royalties, that's good, and to make access as broad as possible, but 10 millions won't last long, and to build up a long-term digital preservation center. That's a very good idea. So thank you for the ideas. If you have any comment, 1 or 2 questions are really welcome to our panelists. Is someone who is really eager to ask questions, or you're so tired that you have no idea what to ask? Okay, well, I won't push you far. I want to thank our panelists for panel 1, but I have gifts for you, so just don't run away. You can applaud. So, thank you. Okay, so now we are having our session number 2, and I would like to invite Mrs. Talihärm, Mrs. Karvonen, and Mr. Leifsson to take place on the podium. And we have a different mentee question now, which is the best online resource or product that's already existing of cultural heritage created in Northern Europe is. You just name it. If you don't think that there is any, you can also write down that you don't think that there are any resources. Sorry? The best online resource or product of cultural heritage created in Northern Europe. Taking into account that we also have representative from Iceland, so we cannot say Baltic Sea area. And Iceland is not really there. It's really difficult to say. I know that you're from Poland, Gintautė, so I know that it's very difficult to locate where Poland is. North, Eastern, whatever, Europe. So, you have no idea? No, that's okay. But we will try to inspire you. So, my first question for you is also is going to be the question on the terminology. Basically, in the era of social and technological transformations, is heritage still cultural? Or should it become a notion understood across all policy agendas? It's like, shouldn't we, in a way, to understand as a heritage almost everything that's happening with us? For example, not only Beyoncé's clip on YouTube, but also comments on that clip, which may seem as, for us, in a way, as unworthy to save, but if maybe everything is a heritage.
Well, all the things you listed are cultural, of course. You know, even the comments on the video, they are part of culture. Is it heritage? Maybe it will become that one day, but you know, the way we work today, at least, I mean, we preserve things that are defined by law, by regulations. Archaeological objects, old documents, you know, and all the documents that are prepared by official institutions, governmental agencies, and so on. I don't think that the government will start to actively collect everything they categorize that people say on Facebook. You know, that's spying or something, you know, it's, so, yeah. I don't think we'll have a huge paradigm shift necessarily with this digital shift, you know. A lot of the things that we have been preserving in paper analog form, we are preserving now in digital form. But, you know, it's an exponential growth, of course. But, you know, it's almost like recording what people say at the kitchen table. You know, if you start to look at Twitter or Facebook or whatever you like. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think everything mankind creates, it is heritage. But will it be cultural heritage? It must be written in policies, in action plans of every sector, because every sector must take care of their legacy. That's why it's important to write their legacy preservation in every policy, not only in cultural policy.
Thank you. It's an interesting question. If heritage is expression of values and beliefs and knowledge, so I mean, how come the comment in Facebook is not heritage when you look at it from the future perspective? I'm thinking about like how, for example, political decisions were made in Finland in the 70s. They were made in sauna, and usually there were men because of the place which was sauna. So we don't have actually any documentation on that. Now they are made in emails. I would really, really like to have those emails preserved for future generations. Gossiping was happening in street corners and still is, but quite often it's happening in the comments in Facebook. So then again, I mean, would be nice to be able to capture these phenomena. This is an idealistic way of looking on this issue. The problem is not kind of, you know, is this heritage? Of course it is. the question is more like, can we afford to preserve it, and in which amount we can preserve it, and who will be responsible for doing it, and where we. But I think that we are actually running a little bit late. We are kind of, enjoying our self-expression in the digital world and don't really understand that we are creating something at the same time, which is a very typical thing for our era. And of course, I would like the future generations to see how we actually communicated, what kind of dialogue we had, what kind of disbeliefs and disconnections we had because of these things that are expressed in social media. And then, is heritage culture? Well, culture is heritage, but heritage is everywhere.
Thank you for your answer. We'll stay in this area of digital and something what's contemporary and happening. I remember that a year ago when GDPR or EU General Data Protection Regulation was put through the European Parliament, that everyone was unsure how it's going to impact every sphere of cultural activity. Do you see copyrights as something that is hindering collection and maintaining of cultural heritage? And do you have any idea how to prevent that, how to overcome some problems that already exist with copyrights? Or everything is okay and is fine? Or your opinion on that, what should we do with copyrights after the GDPR?
Not everything is not okay with copyright, and we know we lack the skills among cultural institutions, professionals, creators. We don't know how to use, how to implement. Even universities don't teach our students how to cope with today's rules. And we must start from the bottom. We must advocate our audience, no matter where they are, and we must cooperate to cope with these problems we are challenged today.
Maybe this has to do with my job more than with the reality, because I actually think that, I have some difficulties, honestly, to understand how copyright as such could be a problem. Then we have, ways to cope with the questions like what to preserve, how to preserve it, can we preserve it, how to provide access to information, and on which grounds, what to do with privacy issues, and GDPR has a lot to do with privacy issues and not copyright issues. And what kind of frameworks we have, what kind of structures, what kind of solutions like collective licensing. And I think it's in a way clear as I would say, a principle and not that easy to do in practice, is the fact that we want to give access to all information that we can give access to. And at the same time, we would like to really protect the rights, which is another issue. And of course, we think, well, when money is an issue here, so who will be the entity who pays for this, that people have access to information, and at the same time the market is still there and they are doing their jobs, because we are talking about the future of Europe and also the future of our countries, and copyright has a lot to do with that. If you want to have a strong creative industries, we need these kind of things. So in a way, I don't see that at all as a problem. But when it comes to the GDPR, so I'm happy to say that there were some exceptions in our national legislation for memory institutions, and that's good. And then this is a nasty thing to say, but I think that that act actually was an awakening call for memory institutions to really care about these matters. Of course, the big ones are good at this, but also the smaller ones had to pay attention. And I think that, for example, in Finland, the institutes were networking around this subject for like really heavily for the last year or so, and that's a good thing.
I think that copyright is really important, and it's really important to uphold people's privacy as well. I don't think that this is a problem necessarily. I mean, it's just something that governments have to work around and find solutions to through contracts and so on. So, yeah.
I have a very brief following question. Should governments spend more money on paying for the royalties? As there was idea about the 10 million euros, paying for royalties for those who have created some objects or phenomena of cultural heritage. Should governments engage themselves more and spend that these things could be more accessible?
Yeah, I think in the future this will be probably, unavoidable, in short.
Public money will go for the copyright.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to have these things open for the public, like we want to do now with all literature open to everybody at home, I mean, somebody has to be compensated for their artistic work and their creative work.
Yeah.
Yes, it is important to have access to different works, and if there is need to pay extra, we must do this.
I see no reason why not. I mean, obviously, would be a really good thing. And for example, if I'm thinking about the kind of collections of the museums, we are talking about unique pieces. You can't have access to them online if you don't have some kind of a contract. But it's always a matter of who pays and who benefits.
So basically, politicians, you should be afraid. No politicians are here, but basically you should be afraid because you will have to spend more money. We have been now also talking lots about international cooperation. And I will ask you a question regarding that. You definitely know some good practices in Baltic Sea, in other Baltic Sea or Northern European countries, which you see as beneficial, as fruitful, but which are not implemented in your country. Which practices of other countries in the sphere of the digital, of the cultural heritage and digital era you would like to apply to your policies in your countries? Where basically, very shortly saying which ideas and policies you would steal for your own country.
I would like to steal from Ülle the kind of, clever use of artificial intelligence in collection management, and I would like to steal from Eva this kind of Swedish kind of, I would say, skills, competencies for kind of, ongoing and fruitful dialogue.
Okay.
I would steal the Finnish Finafi access platform, because it is success story of cooperation, archives, museums, libraries, to provide better access to culture.
Yes, I agree. I would like to develop a project plan to borrow the Finnish idea for Finna. And, the name works in Icelandic. It's called find in Icelandic, so Finna would be excellent to keep this all together in one place.
Okay, so basically, Nordic countries are still, like Baltic countries are stealing from the Nordic countries, and Nordic countries are stealing from each other ideas.
We borrow from everybody in this regard. Okay?
So, yeah. And I hope that you will do that. So we're close to the end of our discussion, and if we look on the good examples of the products, you see quite a lot of, we have Latvian ones, we have also Finnish and for example, Norwegian Digital Museum. We are all very proud of success stories, but my last question to you would be, you as a policymaker, what you would do with databases or with digital products that have been funded by public money that don't work. In fact, we know such examples, and we know also in Latvia some. I would not name them, but I suppose that in your countries there are also cases when you build up a large project and it doesn't work. What to do to close it down, to rebuild it, which costs lots of money usually with digital products, or just to archive it? Because basically my question is about what to do in the case when we don't have success story, but a story of failure.
I'm generally quite optimistic. I think that if you spend resources, a lot of resources and money and brain power on building something, it's usually not for, well, it's for nothing. It's so you must be able to find solutions to fix it, make it better, make it work, or incorporate it into something else. There
have been no failures in Iceland?
Probably, I would imagine, but nothing spectacular that I can think of at the moment, nothing on a grand scale. But it is a process of learning, when you build up things like this, and you slowly accumulate the knowledge and know-how, and it's, yeah.
Okay. In Estonia, have you had any failures? You shouldn't name the projects, but basically, and have you had failures, and what have you done with them?
Yes, definitely we have not success stories in the future, but we must have courage to overcome the losses and learn from the past. And if we look into the future and past, the analog cultural institutions and their process were built up in centuries. And now we are coping with dealing with digital institutions, not with walls. We don't have rules, so we must cooperate and learn from each other. And sometimes we make mistakes, but we must learn and do better things, not like the other did.
Okay.
It's a marvelous question. I think that still in Finland we quite often, in a way, copy the processes of the analog world to the digital world, and that's actually the end result is a lousy service. I even think that I might have a reputation of somebody who kills somebody else's darlings. I've done it a lot. But my point of view to that is that we are too ashamed of our failures, and I think it's a bad thing to call them failures, because it's good for you to make mistakes, because then you learn. How on earth do you learn if you feel that you're always successful? You're actually have some kind of a really odd illusion of yourself and your institution. If that's the way you see yourself, it's okay. You can call it like experiment or pilot, but it's better to kind of, face the reality. And quite often there's a lot to be saved, although you kill the service. You might have very good metadata, and you will certainly hurt somebody's feelings, but I mean, if you compare to the benefits that you are able to create something new with the same amount of money, so I would really would like to see the future in that way, that we would be kind of, wiser, still innovative, still ready to try something and find out, well, this was not our cup of tea, and that's fine, or coffee. So in a way, it has to do with attitude. It has to do with the way that we hate to make mistakes, and we should learn to love our mistakes.
Okay, that's a really positive thing to end our discussion on. But do you have any questions, any comments? Tomorrow yes.
Yes, this is Kristiina Hormia from Finland. Actually, some minutes ago you were discussing about the copyright and the need to pay more to open materials for use. And I'd like to comment that we have also the Open Science Initiative very strongly in Europe. Of course, it doesn't cover all of the cultural heritage, but still it covers the published, so publications and data, methods, quite sort of big part of the cultural heritage. And I think in national policies we would also need to look into this and what kind of possibilities this brings. And of course in the open science philosophy you also open the decision making and the processes and all that. So this is one comment.
Thank you. Is someone else who wants to speak? Huh? No? No? We'll have second day of the conference. Now we should say thanks to all people who participated in discussions to our policymakers. So let's give them applause. Thank you. I will give you gifts right away, but Dagnia has very, very, very important information to you all.
Yes, indeed, I do have a wrap-up of today. Thank you very much to all the panelists. I think it was really, really great having you here. For me, it gave a couple of ideas I didn't ask you as questions, but I hope we'll have the chances to address them. The first question was, when talking about cultural heritage and digital age, are we not losing analog heritage at all in all this picture? Because somehow the word digital is getting really, really aggressively overwhelming in all the agendas. So that's what was my thinking and of where is it. And the second thought I had with the second question we had put up on Menti was about, it seemed to me that unfortunately it looks like that we are not that quite aware of what other institutions actually are doing online. If we had to really, really name things, it's always, I don't know, I have to think of them. So it's not that easy. We know our own resources, and then we are a little bit shy of calling them the best examples. But then and then maybe other institutions, and then on that moment we suddenly do become a little bit timid. So I think it gave us a good food for thought of today, and I think it was a very nice conclusion of today, which I hope you will continue also at the reception tonight. So today we have had a really, really good day. We have had excellent speakers, and in the name of organizers, I need to thank you and give you small packages also from the National Library of Latvia. If Karin will be here, she'll help me, but if not, I will give these to you. So really, I would like to thank all the speakers. I would also like to thank all the expert groups for their presentations. And we all know that tomorrow these will be followed. So there will be expert group actually discussions on a very small scale, on a very present level where we can openly, without recording, discuss things. So I do hope and invite you to engage in these smaller groups because I think after all it is always the process of thinking we want to start or restart or in general turn on. Furthermore, tomorrow we'll be also having a national day for digital cultural heritage, and the atrium will be full of projects that the National Library of Latvia has carried out for digital heritage. And we will be also having a national debate after the end of this conference. So we have interlinked these two events, but that's why we are also inviting you in the breaks to really come to the atrium and discuss with people who have been responsible for various digital I wouldn't call them tools, for various digital resources that have been created here at the National Library of Latvia. Furthermore, we'll be also listening to two keynoters tomorrow by Anda Baklan and Jussi-Pekka. I don't see him at the moment, but we'll be having two more keynoters, and then we'll just come back and all the Zariņš will conclude it, wrap it up, all the group presentations. And at the end of the conference, I hope we'll be able to bring some kind of report and summary of what we had discussed and ideas we have exchanged. But now, we are a little bit ahead of time, but still a reception remains, and it will start within half an hour. What's the time, Gustavs? It's 5 o'clock, so reception will start at 5:30, so everybody has half an hour to just stretch around. I will tell. On the first exhibition, in the first exhibition hall, which is outdoor in atrium, the bright room with large windows. So we'll be almost outdoors in the sun. But now, thank you very much, and thank especially all the keynoters. I would just give all these small presents to all of you.